It was on this little tiny mountain, less than a mile high in the center of Maine, called Katahdin. It's the highest point in Maine. It's the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. The long and short of it was there were some changes in plan, some changes in weather, some big challenges with navigation in a whiteout after dark with people that I wasn't supposed to be guiding that I was, and a group that had been divided purposely. And we were on the tablelands of Katahdin, which is again like less than a mile high, after dark in a snowstorm that was blowing probably 60 miles an hour, and you were literally in the ping pong ball. This is before the days of GPS being very common. And the most profound piece of that for me was that this is in the winter as well, of course. It was cold enough, we've been traveling long enough, we were tired enough that I was like, oh, we could just sit down and take a break. And that's how people die on mountains.
This episode of Outliers, I'm speaking with Silas Rossi. Silas is the president of the American Mountain Guide Association, or the AMGA. He's a career mountain guide, and it was great talking to him about how he got introduced to climbing and guiding. I'm a huge fan of Silas's online channels. I've linked his Instagram and YouTube below. If you're into climbing, guiding, or adventure, this is a great podcast for you. So let's get into it. Silas, thanks so much for joining.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Could you tell me what being an AMGA president means?
Oh, wow. That's a big question right off the bat. What's it mean? Well, I mean, technically it means that I'm the AMGA's representation to the IFMGA, which is the International Federation of Mountain Guides, which the AMGA is a member. And so they recognize our standards as being up to snuff with the international standard. So that's the technical piece of it. I travel once a year. This year I'm going to Prague for the annual IFMGA meeting. I haven't been to one of those before myself, so I'm curious to see how that all works and what happens there. But that's what it means technically. It used to be the chair of the board of directors as well at the AMGA. We split that role into a separate role for the president and chair of the board either last year or 2 years ago. Just to kind of divide the workload up a little bit. So I'm on the executive committee and part of the board of directors for the AMGA, but not the actual chair.
Yeah. And how does one become the president? Is there an electoral college?
Yeah, so basically the AMGA membership votes on the board of directors, and
okay.
the board of directors votes in turn on the actual executive committee and different roles within that.
That's really cool. I mean, you have such a amazing career in climbing, like with those accolades, being president, and you have over 2 decades of guiding experience. Curious if you could share your own story about how you got into climbing.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Maine, pretty rural part of Maine. My family was very blue collar, and spent a bunch of time outside, like as a kid, hiking and biking and all that kind of stuff, and had always wanted to go rock climbing, mountain climbing, but never could really find a way to do that. So was in Boy Scouts and Explorer Scouts up through like middle school and so forth. And then eventually once I went to school in Maine, I went to the University of Maine at Orono for engineering, had a really good scholarship that paid for a bunch of that program for the duration. 2 years into that engineering program, I found Mainbound, which was part of the university climbing program there. It was run by this guy, John Tierney, who's now an IFMGA guide and owner of Acadia Mountain Guides. And so as soon as I found that program, I took a couple credit courses and was like, oh my gosh, like what I always thought I wanted to do this is it. Like it definitely is what I want to do. And so basically took some credit courses, started like apprenticing in the gear shop in Bar Harbor the next summer, learning how to climb, did some like school vacation trips to Red Rock, learned how to lead, all that kind of stuff. And basically just jumped in with both feet. And John was a great mentor, as well as a couple other friends that I'm still best friends with that I met through that program. Became climbing partners and mentors. And gosh, that was, 25 years ago or whatever. And eventually transitioned out of engineering into like a park recreation tourism type degree with a concentration in outdoor education, because the school didn't actually have an outdoor education degree. And basically like got a degree in college, but really focused a lot on the guiding piece pretty soon after learning to climb initially. So Yeah, that was the start.
What is it about being introduced to climbing that it immediately got its hooks in you and you decided to pivot your education path towards it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I just really enjoyed the challenge of it, both the mental and the physical challenge, and the fact that I had to actually be good in order not to,
Mm,
first of all, perish, but also just to be reasonably proficient at it. You actually, there was some consequence if you weren't good, and so I just really dug that. I still dig it. It's a little more scary to me now than it was when I started, for sure. Just understanding the actual risk involved, I think, better now than I did. But that was the initial piece, was just like, this is hard mentally, physically. You have to be good at it, and gosh, it's pretty fun and life affirming when things go well, which thankfully they have for me mostly.
yeah, yeah. And what was your athletic background like before you got into it?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a small school. Yeah, I played soccer in the fall. I ran track in the spring. Basketball was never my thing. So just a lot of like just team sports in high school and so forth. Um, but the smaller team aspect of climbing, like having a partner that you really trust and work well with, was definitely part of the attraction. Not just doing it on your own, but having a small like partner or a small team was definitely pretty attractive.
Yeah. Do you think you would describe yourself as competitive?
I mean, yeah, I, I, yeah, yes and no. I'm not the most competitive person I know, um,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty competitive. Yeah.
Yeah. I
I
was
mean,
wondering
I
how
mean,
you saw that like transition play out because it's so apparent what winning looks like in those team sports you described.
yeah,
And
that's
climbing has a kind of more opaque definition of winning.
a good question. Yeah, I was never that focused on like winning or losing relative to somebody else, and I think that's what
Mm,
climbing really gave me, was you're not like, there's not one winner, one loser. It's more just the process overall of like being competitive, being as good as you can be, improving all the time. And that's what really got me, I think, most interested in climbing, is that, I mean, I guess there is a clear like loss or ultimate win, but most of the time it's much more subtle than that. And so just working through the process over the long term, and this being something you can do for a long time, for your whole career until you're quite late in age, was certainly more attractive than, something where you would peak at 20 or 25 or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense to me. What would be your advice to someone who's like familiar with climbing in a gym, but is looking to get into outdoor climbing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the key, no matter where you are with your climbing, is having a mentor. So I think that, early in my career, when I was probably like 2 years into climbing, um, I remember a conversation with John Tierney in like whatever the community hall at University of Maine. There was a young student that came up to me who was just starting out and was asking John about how to get started. And John was like, "Well, you need to find a mentor like Silas." And I was like, in my head, I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, I've been climbing for like 2 years. Like, I'm not a mentor. I need mentoring." But what it really made me realize was that ultimately we can all, in every stage of our careers, be in both roles, right? You should be actively seeking out a mentor, and ideally several mentors in different kind of categories, whether it's movement, technical systems, big mountain kind of wisdom, all that kind of stuff. We should be actively seeking out that mentorship, but also ideally, I think, trying to give back to the next generation and folks that are looking up to us, and we can mentor them. So that's been really my goal my whole career, has been to seek out good mentorship in whatever I'm doing, while also trying to give back.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I wanted to ask you if you thought about teaching as a career when you were in college because you're so good at calmly explaining things.
Oh, thanks. I mean, yeah, I thought for a long time I'd go back and get a master's in education, or, a PhD or something. Um, but by the time that I got to a place in my guiding where I was wanting that I could take a break from doing the certification process and go back and do that, I was kind of on a trajectory of doing the things I'd always wanted to do. So it didn't really quite make sense to me. But I've always really valued the educational piece. And there's lots of hashtags and fancy things about what good education is, but to me it was just like having that good mentorship early on, both in my scouting career and in my climbing career, it just really showed me that it doesn't have to be a lot, but just the right piece of information at the right time for you can just make such a world of difference. Like, I mean, just that story I told a minute ago, like those things are so impactful. And it wasn't, it wasn't a 10-day course that I was doing. It was just a 5-minute conversation. But it was the right conversation at the right time that really made it hit home. So that's always been really important to me. And I've been really lucky to have a lot of really great teachers, both professionally trained teachers and just naturally gifted educators, I think.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
think
like were your parents educators? I mean, it comes across so naturally to you. You just break down and articulate things so simply.
Oh, thanks. No, I think all parents are educators, but not formally trained. My mom did some substitute teaching when I was growing up. My dad's a carpenter and builder, like kind of a master craftsman, and he's always mentored kind of people learning the trades and not cutting their fingers off or anything worse. But no formal training at all. And I think to me, like, good education, first of all, you just have to care, right? Like, you have to care about whoever you're talking to or speaking with, and try to be empathetic with where they're coming from. And that was kind of my first question we got on the call, was like, well, who's your audience, right? Like, who am I speaking to? Like, how can I frame my experience? How can I put that in a context that will be helpful to people that are learning at different stages, right? And so, I mean, again, like John Tierney early on really instilled in myself and other people at Mainbound was that, look, I can show you a very specific way to do something based on what I think is hopefully, some of the best practice right now. But what I'd rather have you understand is that I'm going to show you a concept, a way of solving a problem, or a way of thinking through some problem solving that will allow you to, as you grow and gain more experience and see more nuance, be able to apply these same concepts in a more advanced way, a more nuanced, more specific way based on these parameters that we can't foresee right now, but that when the time comes, will just intuitively make sense to you. That was all kind of wordy, but basically, again, to come back to like the point being, just giving the person just the right nugget at just the right time to help them take the next step is, I think, what is most important. And that takes a lot of just reading people and understanding where they're at, and how they see the world.
Yeah, I imagine that's a huge tool you sharpen as a guide, understanding where your client is and where they want to be, knowing how far to coach them or push them.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all different, obviously. I remember working at Exum, like in my early years there, we would do basically a 2-day training in the valley, like 2 single-day trainings for people that had never climbed at all, oftentimes, and then take them up on the Grand Teton, which is a sizable mountain, almost 14,000 feet. Much of it not very technical, but it's a big outing. And I remember one of the owners of Exum, Nat Patridge, would say, it's like, we do these 2 days of training, but to be honest, like in the first 10 minutes of them walking through the boulder field, I already know who's going to be successful on day 4 and who's not, like 99% of the time, right? So you still have to do the training, of course, like get them prepped and, have them learn these technical skills, understand what to expect, etc. But largely you can tell a lot just by watching people move, watching them manage stress, and just kind of see how they, like we said before, problem solve and how they can just start moving through the world. So it's like this intuition, this kind of like sixth sense that you just kind of like, after studying it and being thoughtful about it for a long time, you just try to start to understand what people need at different times, which is, it's really fun. And that, for me, it's the art of the whole guiding instruction thing, is that I live in the Gunks here, which has a whole bunch of climbing, but for all intents and purposes, I have like access to 100 routes that are really high quality all the time. And just by walking with the same parking lot every single day with a group of people and talking to them and seeing them move a little bit, I can craft a day, regardless of the resource that I'm in, that is challenging both mentally and physically, but not over their heads. And so you're just getting input, putting more input in, and seeing what comes out the other side.
Is that the puzzle piece element that keeps the job exciting to you, figuring out how to map that all together?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, the climbing, the movement piece is really fun. Being outside is really fun. but just that art of like combining people with terrain to create this experience for them is the most rewarding for sure.
Is there a liberating element when you're climbing on your own that you don't have to like deal with? I know it's an exciting puzzle piece to manage, but when you're just by yourself, is there excitement that, oh, I can just focus on climbing and the movement and the art of climbing?
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit less pressure to have a particular outcome for the day. But honestly, I kind of at this point, I kind of view climbing days as all being a similar mindset for me. Like I don't want to have anyone get hurt or killed, obviously. I want to have fun. I want to push myself or somebody else. Like the way to create an experience each day is the same,
Right.
right? Like I'm matching people and goals and abilities to terrain. Of course, with other external factors like weather and conditions and all that kind of stuff too. So it's kind of all the same. It's like an algorithm going on in the back of my head all the time that I'm kind of calculating, some consciously, some subconsciously. But it's not really a very different shift in mindset, I don't think, personally from guiding. It's just like who I'm focused on creating the experience for, I think. Yeah.
Could you describe like when would someone be like, what makes a good client ready for that next step to hire a guide to take them and introduce them to the outdoor world? Where should they be at in their climbing journey?
Oh, geez. I think literally, I think whether it's day one for somebody and they have never even had a harness on, or if it's, 25 years in and they're at their local crag, I think that if you find the right person to go outside with, meaning they have the right skill sets to help you move the needle, I think that it's always the right time. And I think that's a bit of it's kind of a bummer in the guiding, or the perception of guiding in North America is like you kind of have these boxes for different places that people hire guides and things to do with them. But geez, if you have something you're up to and want to move the needle, like I think the time is anytime you want to invest in it. And it's an investment in yourself, right? Ultimately, whether it be skills or movement or accessing some big peak or climb that you wouldn't be able to do on your own. I think there's a lot of preconceived notions that go along with people hiring guides. And unfortunately, and I think a lot of them just don't really hold that much water. I think that if you want to invest time and energy in yourself and advance in some way, like now's the time. Find the right person and go make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. How did you know when you were ready to become a guide? What does that process look like when you're ready to pursue that career?
Good question. It's a long time ago. Again, I had this huge benefit of having several mentors in place, and I was relatively conservative, I think, like in my just evaluation of my own skill sets, which I think is really smart. But I also had good mentorship that was just would just like nudge me a little bit and just give me the extra little push that I needed to just keep stretching a little bit all the time. And I think the guide training courses are a good place to do that as well. But will you ask your initial question one more time? I'm not sure I totally nailed it.
Yeah. Just when did you feel like you were ready to fully commit to becoming a mountain guide?
Got it. I don't know. I had like a 10-year arc.
Yeah.
I had a 10-year arc where I worked from like very part-time guiding seasonally to eventually full-time guiding for myself, my own business. And it was just a very slow, like kind of snowball rolling downhill, gathering speed, momentum, like as I gained confidence, which I gained through becoming better at it. But also like just kind of learning all the ins and outs of seasonalities of where I would go certain times of year, how to still make money, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff, and also invest in the guide training. So it was just like this ever slowly moving downhill, big snowball gathering mass.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced when you started your own company?
Just having the guts to say, I can do it.
Nice.
I think, honestly, like it was really scary. Like at first, at the point that I actually started Alpine Logic was 2007. And at that point, I had managed Acadia Mountain Guides climbing school for 2 years, which meant like, scheduling and bringing in clients for 12 guides or so in the summer, a few less than that in the winter, but doing that year round for 2 years. And then I had also just passed my AMGA rock guide exam, which is the highest level rock guiding certification in the US. And so I just had this realization that I was like, well, geez, if someone with my skill sets can't start their own company, who the heck can? Like, why wouldn't I do that? And so it took me a long time to gain the confidence to say that, but that was a realization for me that was like, no, just like start, like just make the next step. And the same thing was true for this membership that I run called the Ascend membership, which was now 3 years ago. Like, you just got to have the courage to take the next step, the first step, and things will start happening, right? Like, I'm not saying jump in both feet in the deep end and throw caution to the wind, because I think in this business you can't do that. But just having the courage to take one step, the next step all the time, and see what happens. Like, be willing to be okay with like not knowing what's going to happen, goes a very long way. So, I mean, that's the definition of courage, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's such a easy parallel for me to make to climbing, where it's like, okay, you have your technical base down, you know your ins and outs, but you're just doing one move at a time when you're scared.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, being okay with the unknown is what climbing is largely about, unless you're just doing the same routes and same grades over and over again. So I think there's a lot of room for growth for most of us in that category of like, well, are you uncomfortable not knowing? Like,
Yeah.
can you be okay being stressed out about not knowing? And can you trust your future self to keep making good decisions? Because right now, all you have to do is make one decision. And that's the same mindset whether you're on lead or starting a business. Is that it's like, well, are you safe right now? Cool. Can you trust yourself in the future to also make a decision about being safe or not? Cool. Now you can decide, right? Not that the solution is always to go forward or up, but I mean, making good decisions, like that decision-making process, is what climbing is all about. And I think like all these technical skills, the movement skills, the interpersonal skills, you know, reading weather, all those things are just like a means to an end, so that when you are wherever you are and you're kind of maxed out, you can still make good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Just hearing you articulate these responses and just watching your reels, you're very calm and you have a very calming energy that you output. Do you do meditation, or does climbing itself is climbing a meditative exercise for you?
Yeah, it is. I appreciate you saying all that. I think that I've actually, the last several years, become more calm overall as a person. I don't meditate much per se. I have done the last couple of years of a bit of therapy, which I think actually really helped a lot. I hadn't really done anything until maybe 3 years ago. I also did a 9-month-long certification course to become what's called a trauma-informed coach. It's not a therapist, but it's kind of like therapy light, if you want to explain it really simply. So I have a much better understanding of like just the nervous system in general, and really got to see how, I mean, first of all, my nervous system reacts and works. And like even now, like 20 minutes later in the interview, I'm much more relaxed than I was initially. Like I said, I was a little bit nervous, to be honest. You could probably tell if you went back and looked at the video again. But I think that like that overall recognition of your nervous system and where it is all the time is something that's really important to climbing. I mean, if you're just like kind of like jacked and buzzing all the time, you just don't have access to the important part of your brain that makes decisions well, right?
Yeah.
And so the way climbing plays into it for me now is that I try to, it's almost like a moving meditation. I mean, people might argue that know more about meditation than I do. But it's definitely, at any rate, like being in the body and trying to not be in my head as much, but more just like in my body moving. I've recorded a whole bunch of like these point of view videos with my Insta 360 camera. And a lot of them are either routes I've guided a lot, or even while I was guiding in some cases. And so they're easy for me. And those are the routes the ones that are easy, that I know well, I can really just like flow and move pretty consistently on. And I'm not stressed at all. And that's really cool feeling.
There's one video in particular I'm thinking of where you just finished the mountain Matterhorn. In my head, it's one of the most imposing mountains on the earth. And you just calmly recap like this, why you made certain decisions, or like what the weather was like. You know? And like if you took that video out of context and just played the audio, you would not think this person just climbed Matterhorn.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a nod to like like the separation in my mind between guiding and recreational climbing is that as guides and instructors, like we should not be headlining or even honestly, a lot of times in flow state, we should be like ratcheted back enough in more of a control. Like if you know, like flow state, like the vertical horizontal axis, like if you ratchet back from the edge of being maxed out from flow state, which is like where you're perceiving the effort to be hard and challenging, but you're also competent at that effort. That's kind of like flow state. So if you step back a little bit in terms of your competence, they call it more of a control state. And so control basically means that I just have more bandwidth to offer other people stuff and like focus on other external things than if I'm like truly in flow state because of the movement being hard or the objective being hard. And I think that that's a really good place for instructors or guides to strive for, is that like this is an adventure for my clients, but really like I need to know, maybe not every second, every outing, but largely almost all the time, I got to know how this is going to go. Right?
Yeah.
Like I should be able to tell the future about what's going to happen and how it's going to unfold here largely. You know, obviously big events that are not being considered, but which ties back to like, well, I know how hard this is going to be for my client, right? I know their movement ability, I know their emotional capacity, et cetera, so that I know they'll be pushed, you know, and challenged, but not put over the limit in terms of what they're able to do. So yeah, that's my personal goal at the very least when I'm guiding or instructing, is that I'm not maxed out. I can remain calm, and if I'm calm, I'm not focused on what I need. I can focus on what other people need, and that's really the bottom line for me. Is like I want to be able to give people what they need all the time.
Interesting thing about guiding, I'm curious your take on, is climbing to me, especially in the outdoors, isn't always fun. Like it's always retrospectively fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many times during it, I'm like, I'm too scared and it doesn't feel fun to me. I've passed that comfort zone window. At least I think I do in the moment.
Yeah.
But then when you finish the climb or you're driving back, you're like, okay, that was all really fun and it felt good.
Totally.
Like, how do you know, is there a sense you have as a guide of saying like, okay, I can tell where his head is at right now, but it still is in a comfort zone I know he'll appreciate soon?
I mean,
does that make sense?
Absolutely. I've heard this thing like type 1, type 2, and type 3 fun, right? Like
yes.
Type 1 fun is like you're having fun right now, yahoo, like I'm skiing low angle, awesome powder.
Right.
Then
like I imagine as a guide, there's a pressure to be all type 1. Like if you are doing an outing.
It really depends. I mean, it really depends on what people want to do. And oftentimes that's part of the calculus, is to figure out like, well, someone's asking for this thing. Like the Matterhorn's a great example. Like I want to climb the Matterhorn. I'm like, well, and based on what I've seen of your ability right now and your experience, I don't think you're gonna have fun on that.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe not too. Like it may not even be possible. And if it were possible, it's going to be a whole lot of type 3 fun, which is not fun at all. So, so trying to balance, I think, those 3 types of fun, fun now, fun later, not fun at all, is part of the calculus. And it's different for each person. Like some people just want to like grind themselves into the ground physically, right? And they're happy to do that and they have a great time doing it. Other people like just aren't that familiar with trying hard, to be honest. Like they're just like, what do you mean I've got to do like a pistol squat here while I pull on my fingertips? Like that's not fun at all. Like I just want to go for like a romp, you know?
Right.
So if I look at the overall client experience, I kind of see these like 3 concentric circles. That's like a bit of an Olympic circle, Olympic symbol rather, like a Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have client security is one bubble. It's like they have to remain physically safe all the time, right? That's a given. But like how much do we push them emotionally or psychologically, right? Like feeling safe is a whole category. Then you kind of have like the so you have client security, client reward, and reward, security, comfort. And I guess you could kind of say that comfort is also like emotional or psychological comfort, but security, comfort, and reward. So security has to remain high all the time, but you might let the other ones kind of ebb and flow a little bit back and forth from, well, if the reward is to get to the top of the mountain today, we might have to forego some comfort to get there. right?
Mm.
Or the reward might just be being outside all day. And by being comfortable physically and emotionally, we get the reward. So that's kind of the way I look at the client experiences, like those three bubbles. And I'm kind of playing with like, well, which are we going to push right now? And what do people want? What do they really want, despite saying what they think they want? That'll get them that high quality experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's the most fun part of the whole job, I think.
Yeah. No, it seems like it is, if like when I think about the 10,000 hours you put in to a thing to become a master in it, that to me feels like what a master guide can do, is
Yeah,
navigate those bubbles you talked about.
yeah, ideally for sure. And it's not to say that we don't make mistakes and miss it sometimes, for sure. That definitely happens as well. But yeah, that's the fun part.
Can you tell me about how many times have you climbed the Matterhorn?
That's a good question. Around 6, I think. That might not be true. It might be more than that. Between 6 and 10.
Wow.
Off the top of my head, yeah. I did it three
That's really
times,
cool.
just 3 times this past summer. Yeah, and people were all really ready for it. We had good conditions, good weather, and people performed really, really well. It was awesome.
Do you have any stories you could share about when you were personally most scared climbing? Doesn't have to be in a guiding capacity, but just
Yeah,
by.
definitely. I mean, yeah, one of the times I was most scared, I think for the longest, which was part of why it was so scary, was on this little tiny mountain, less than a mile high in the center of Maine, called Katahdin. It's the highest point in Maine. It's the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. And this was very early in my climbing career. And the overall story is longer, and there are lots of lessons that I've drawn from that over my career that I could probably share, I guess. But the long and short of it was that there were some changes in plan, some changes in weather, some big challenges with navigation in a whiteout after dark with people that I wasn't supposed to be guiding that I was, and a group that had been divided purposely. And we were on the tablelands of Katahdin, which is again like less than a mile high, after dark in a snowstorm that was blowing probably 60 miles an hour, and you were literally in the ping pong ball. This is before the days of GPS being very common. And these 2 people were still in my care, and the most profound piece of that for me was that this is in the winter as well, of course. It was cold enough. We've been traveling long enough. We were tired enough that I was like, oh, we could just sit down and take a break. And that's how people die on mountains.
Mm,
Like, yeah, we're like relatively warm. We'll just like sit down for a minute, chill out, and then never get up.
yeah, yeah. So that
Without
thought enters,
without
and you're like, oh, this is not good.
So that was the scariest, and we got back down to camp at like 11 p.m. So that was the scariest for longest experience I've ever had in the mountains. And it was kind of in a guiding context. And ironically, it was just after I had gotten back from guiding Karsten's Pyramid, which is in Papua. And we basically went there and were successful on guiding this peak that I had very little knowledge about, which was a bit more serious outing. But to come back to Maine, where I grew up, the mountain that I'd hiked when I was 10 years old, and then to just get like absolutely humbled and just, yeah, it was really very humbling, and just reminded me again that like this is a pretty serious game, that
Yeah,
even if you think you have things under control, things can go sideways, things happen that can be unexpected, and especially as a climber, but also especially as a guide and instructor, like you should be ready for the unexpected. You won't ever be overly prepared when things actually go sideways. And that's true also. For instance, I've been a responder to in the mountains, not with our party, but helping other parties, whether it be communication challenges or equipment, things that would have been nice to have but we didn't have. Like, you're just never going to have all the stuff you want to have when things go sideways. And so just being really thoughtful and preparing well and trying to figure out what those things that might happen, maybe unlikely, but that could happen, I think is really, really important. And I think I'm a bit of a pessimist overall anyway, so that kind of fits my nature, to be honest. But I think it's especially important if you're a bit of an optimist and you're like, oh, like what could
Right,
possibly
it'll
go
work out. Yeah.
like in terms of guiding, that's oftentimes a mentality that I mean, it's great. Don't get me wrong. Like I need a little bit of that in my life. My wife is that kind of person, like eternally like overly optimistic. It's a good balance, but I do think being a healthy dose of pessimism goes a long way as well.
That's so funny. I never thought of it like that. That's hilarious. Yeah, prepare in case it. Yeah, it just remember me. There's that saying I love where it's you fall to the level of your preparedness, not rise to your expectations.
Yeah,
I
totally.
kind of thought that's true for climbing. Like I really want to know how to handle stuff when it goes wrong, and
Absolutely.
just better than just hoping it all goes right.
Yeah, totally. No, it's amazing how debilitating just a little bit of stress can be. Whether that stress is physical stress, emotional stress by a partner being hurt or you being hurt, stress like time pressure, stress from it getting dark, or there being weather coming in, or just having
Yeah.
like low blood sugar, any of that kind of stuff, like or dropping a piece of equipment. Like it's just amazing how just a tiny little bit of stress can all of a sudden like make you essentially worthless in terms of making good decisions.
Weather's a big one. We did a climbing trip recently and the wind just picked up and I'd never really been I'm okay with heights, but then the wind really took me
Yeah,
back to a place I hadn't been in a while as far as like my fear of heights.
for
It's
sure.
interesting how that works.
Yeah, I was climbing in Patagonia several years ago, and my buddy Dustin I mean, it's super windy there all the time, almost all the time. And my buddy Dustin just keeps yelling, "Gravity no longer works." The ropes are like sideways 100 feet. You can't set anything down. Yeah, my personal take on wind is that there's like something instinctual in us from way back in the day that means you can't hear predators coming or whatever, and it just makes you like scared. It just like makes you hunker
Oh
down.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, like it's scary. Yeah, I'm with you.
I'll have to tell my brother that I was climbing with him. He wasn't quite as nervous. He's just not on the lookout for predators like I am. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you've traveled all over the world then, huh? South America, you said Jakarta, and now, well,
Yeah.
Europe, obviously, with.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of it. I mean, a lot of the places I've been have been at this point pretty common and pretty well traveled.
Yeah.
I haven't gone to like the Himalaya at all or places like that. Nowhere in China. Those big ranges, but yeah. I mean, at this point, like I'm 43 years old, and I kind of wonder if that's in the cards or not. At a certain point in my career, those big mountains that you have to dedicate like 2 to 3 months to are interesting. I don't know, like more and more, I feel like I'm in this like crossroads of like what the next phase of my climbing career might be. And I've done a bunch of alpine climbing in Alaska and places like that, but it does still interest me, but I also understand how dangerous it is. I think now better than I used to, and so I'm not really sure what the next thing for me is. Like technical ice climbing and mixed climbing and rock climbing has been kind of more what I've been up to the last handful of years, personally. So yeah, it's a big question mark for me. What's next, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how about looking back? What have some highlights been for you as far as mountains you've climbed or areas to climb?
Yeah.
You
Highlights. I
get pretty
mean,
spoiled in the US. Sorry to interrupt, but like Acadia and in the Gunks, it's pretty good.
it's pretty amazing. No, it's the
Yeah.
coolest. It's one of the coolest parts of the job is being able to travel. Basically, it's like, okay, like where's the best place to go right now this time of year? It's like, oh, like, well, this would be good or that would be good. Well, let's go there. And then all of a sudden, clients are like, yeah, I'll go there. That sounds perfect. So it's you get a little spoiled for sure. Like here in the Gunks in the summer, it gets to be 100 degrees and humid, and it's just hot. Like I'm too soft for that anymore. Like I want it to be like it is right now. It's like 60 degrees outside right now. It is
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the Tahitian mountain climbing look like?
Yeah. I mean, highlights though. I mean, I've done some new routes in Alaska a very long time ago at this point, like 2011, 12, 13, like in those years. Was able to do some new routes on the Ruth Gorge with a friend of mine, Peter, and those were really pretty exceptional outings. Both just like in terms of my overall career, but also just like personally at that point, was a bit of a like coming of age sort of thing for me. So those definitely stand out. But then, I mean, just climbing here at my local crag now in the Gunks and like pushing the grade for me, which is, it's not crazy. Like, climbing some harder 12 trad routes here has been really fun. And so I'm not sure like if either one's more rewarding than the other. But they both were really fun at the times I was doing them for sure.
Yeah. Do you bring your wife? Is your wife into climbing? Can she travel with you on these things?
Well, we met because a mutual friend of ours, she used to boulder with, like in high school or middle school or whatever. So she has climbed some. We climbed on our first date, of course, in Acadia, because who wouldn't do that if you're a climbing guide? But she doesn't really rock climb anymore. She's more of
Yeah,
a water person. Yeah. So like she was in France with me this summer in Chamonix. We brought our dog over. She was there for almost 3 months with me, which was great. But we never went rock climbing together. We went hiking and,
that's fun though. That's a beautiful area.
yeah. So lots of good things to do, but not really so much climbing.
Nice. How young were you guys when you met then? If you guys had grade school friends?
Well, she was friends with them in middle school, and I was friends with them climbing much later, like in like my mid-20s.
Gotcha.
They're mutual friends, but spread apart by like 15 years.
Gotcha.
We've been together like 15 plus years now, I guess.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Will you humor me for some speed round questions?
Sure.
Awesome. What's
Does
your
that mean
go-to? Oh,
does that
sorry,
mean
go ahead.
short answers or fast speaking answers? I'm just kidding.
I just jump around, but you take as much time as you want to.
I'll keep them short.
I'm looking at all the weights. What's your go-to workout?
I have a personal trainer. His name is Adam that I work with. It's all remote. He's amazing, Adam Duthie, and he's got a plan for me all the time. I'm trying to like actually put on some muscle right now, so I'm in the middle of a 12-week program, which basically changes every 3 weeks, kind of reevaluating stuff. So it's pretty straightforward strength training. Like I'm strength training 4 days a week right now, trying to put some muscle on,
Nice.
and trying to climb 2 days a week as well.
Wow,
And then
that's a lot.
guiding
What's
like
your
a week.
calorie intake like?
I'm trying to eat 4,000 calories a day, which is
Okay.
really hard for me. Like I'm only like 165 pounds, 170 pounds. And so 4,000 calories, basically means I have to be a little uncomfortably full all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of eating.
A lot of eating. Yep.
Um, if you had to pick, are you a Gree or ATC fan?
I think you gotta have both. I basically have both on my harness almost all the time. This whole wave of like people simul rappelling with Gree and basically not carrying ATCs kind of blows my mind. Like I'm very old school. It's a whole conversation we can get into about simul rappelling, which would take a while perhaps. I'm not a fan of it, but the Gree is an amazing tool, and I use actually a Madrock Safeguard because I'm belaying from the top a lot, and it's releasable, and there's no back feed. So the Gree is awesome. It's probably the best all-around device for lead belaying, top rope belaying. But the Safeguard for me, whether I'm top rope belaying from the bottom or I'm belaying a second from the top, the Safeguard is a little bit more of a usual tool these days because there's no back feed at all. So you pull in rope and it's almost hands-free because it doesn't creep back at all. And I use
Is it like a Traxion, like a Microtrax type device?
It's like a Gree with no spring.
Interesting.
Yep. So it sucks for lead belaying because it doesn't feed out very smoothly. So I use a Black Diamond Pilot a lot of times for lead belaying.
Yeah.
Or a Gree, and then the Safeguard for top rope belaying. So it's a little more like specific tools. And I think everyone should have either an ATC guide or a Petzl Reverso or a whatever the Trango, whatever it is, like some sort of like tube style device that wraps 2 ropes. In my opinion, like basically everyone should have one of those on their harness almost 24/7, so you can rappel 2 strands if you have to from anywhere. So I think you need to answer your speed round question. Both. Sorry.
That's awesome. Cats or dogs?
I'm more of a dogs person.
I was worried we were gonna get it both.
I mean, growing up, I had a stuffed snow leopards. I liked big cats a lot when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8. But dogs day to day for me now are the way to go.
Yeah. I've always thought like cats with dog personalities were the best cats.
Nice.
So just like skip a step and get a dog.
That's awesome. I have a cat-sized dog actually right now. His name is Enzo. He's about 15.5 pounds. So
that's cute.
He's pretty easy to travel with, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Put him right in a backpack, like head over my shoulder when I'm biking or something. Yeah, he's great.
Your forever client. That's awesome.
Totally.
That's awesome. And then two more. What is there a book you recommend everyone should read?
Ooh, that's a great question. A book. Wow, a book. I've got a lot of books.
Yeah. Are you a big reader?
Intermittently. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm not well, I'm reading Outlive by Peter Attia right now. It's a fairly new book, it's just a year or two old. A book anyone should read. I mean, I feel like people like The Freedom of the Hills a lot.
Yeah.
That could be a good option, although I mean, if you're a climber, you should probably have some self-rescue skills. I know that I'll plug my buddies. Ian Nicholson just had a book come out on self-rescue. I have a copy here somewhere. Um, Everyone should know some fundamental self-rescue skills. The other book that's really pretty amazing is Mark Chauvin's Mountain Guide Manual for like the climber that's pretty experienced trying to go to the next level in terms of like rope systems and rescue skills and that kind of stuff. Those books are pretty amazing. The Mountain Guide Manual by Mark Chauvin, and I should find the actual self-rescue titles by Ian Nicholson.
Okay.
But yeah, those are two that come to mind for sure.
Thank you for those. I'm gonna check those out.
Yeah.
And last one would be if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would you have dinner with?
Oh man. Wow. Anyone. Maybe my grandfather.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I never met my dad's dad, and that would be pretty interesting.
Was he from Maine as well?
No, they lived in New York for a long time actually. So my dad moved to Maine for college. Actually, he went to the University of Maine as well. And then but he's from like an hour north of where I live now, originally. Schenectady, New York.
That's interesting. And did you grow up hearing stories about your grandpa?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like he's a bit more of a mystery than I'd like, but yeah, some for sure.
Oh my gosh, that's one of the most interesting answers I've heard. That's a great answer.
I mean, I just think it's really, I mean, both of my grandfathers, to be honest. But I just think like understanding where you've come from, like the therapeutic world calls it like family of origin sort of stuff. Like understanding like the paradigms that you live your life through now are, or at least they've gone through your lineage, right? Like there were things that happened in your great grandparents, your grandparents, your parents. Like there's an evolution there that's gotten you to where you are now. And I just think it'd be really cool to understand like 2 generations ago, just kind of like, yeah, the paradigms of like how they lived their life and the things that they thought about and worried about and valued. I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Yeah, what were your worries like 2 generations ago, especially that generation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if your grandpa like served in World War II or something, but that would be an interesting.
Yeah, I think they both did.
Yeah, gosh, that would be a different world.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Right? It'd be really interesting.
That's a great answer. And then the last question in general would be, what's the best way for people to follow or support you?
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm pretty easy to find. It's a pretty unique name, Silas Rossi, Silas Rossi. That's my handle on Instagram. I do a fair bit of posting on there just the last year. It's been kind of a concerted effort. I have a mixed feeling about social media, but it's 2024, so got to get with the times. So I try to post some things on there pretty regularly. My website is alpine like a hyphen, alpine-logic.com. That's where all my guiding booking happens. That's where you can sign up for the Ascend membership. I also have a membership called Ascend Pro, which is made just for guides and instructors, kind of a professional level membership. And the idea of the memberships in short is that it's meant to be like, much less than a day's of guiding. It's much less, what am I trying to say here? It's a very low cost entry to having good quality mentorship is the goal.
Nice.
Been running it for 3 years. We have like 40 or so episodes of recorded calls in there, as well as some like really high-end instructional videos too, and a pretty amazing community, which is maybe the best part of the whole thing. So yeah, that's where you can find me. If you come to the Gunks, maybe you'll see me on the carriage road.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess on YouTube also. I don't remember my actual YouTube handle. I think it's
I'll plug all the links and stuff, everything below.
Yeah, I think it's just Silas Rossi again on YouTube. But that's a growing thing I've been working on as well. I'm trying to develop a little bit of content that stays beyond just the day that I'm out with people. so
Yeah.
that it has some lasting value. So I appreciate doing this podcast for that reason as well.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Personal question. What's the wildest someone has pronounced your name?
I get Silas a lot. A little
Silas
more.
Rossi or something?
Yeah, exactly. And growing up in Maine, actually, all the locals would call it Rossi, which never really made sense to me. Although there was another family with the same spelling of the same last name in Cherryfield that pronounced it Rossi. So there you go.
Silas Rossi.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate you jumping on.
Oh, Kip, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and yeah, I appreciate you having me on for sure.
Thanks so much to Silas for joining. Had a great time talking with you. And thank you for listening. Be sure to hit all the buttons so you make sure you stay tuned for the next episode.